Orchestrated original memoir narrative was new character names and authentic American voice. Orchestrated original memoir narrative was new character names and authentic American voice. The lawyer slid the papers across his desk and said, "Your children would like you to sign here." And that was the moment I understood that my own son believed I was already gone. I was 68 years old. I had buried my husband 11 days before. And there I sat in a leather chair that squeaked every time I shifted my weight, holding a pen that wasn't mine, being asked to give away the house I'd lived in for 41 years because the two people I'd carried inside my own body had decided I couldn't be trusted to keep it. Let me back up, because if you only hear that part, you'll think I'm a woman who got betrayed, and that's the easy version. The truth is more complicated, and the truth is the only thing I have left worth telling. My name is Eleanor. I grew up outside Dayton, Ohio, the kind of town where everybody's father worked at the same plant, and everybody's mother knew exactly how much your family had in the bank without ever asking. I married Walter in 1979. He was a quiet man who fixed transmissions for a living, came home smelling like motor oil and cigarettes, and never once in 43 years told me he loved me in a voice above a murmur. But he showed up. Every single day he showed up. Every single day he showed up. And I have learned in my long life that showing up, plain and stubborn, is its own language of love, even if it's a language that leaves you lonely some nights. We raised 2 children in that house on Linden Street. A son, Nathaniel, born in 1981, and a daughter, Bridget, born 3 years after. I want to tell you they were good children, and they were, the way most children are good, selfish in the ordinary ways, loving in the inconvenient ways, taking from you with both hands while believing they're giving. I don't say that bitterly. I was the same with my own mother. We don't see what our parents are until it's too late to thank them, and that's just the cruel arithmetic of being a family. But here's the first thing nobody knew about me, the first hidden truth, and it's the small one. Everybody on Linden Street, including my own husband, believed that Walter handled the money. He was the man. He brought home the check. At church at the Thanksgiving table, when the furnace died in January of '94 and we had to decide whether to fix it or replace it, everyone turned to Walter, and Walter, God bless him, would clear his throat and look at me, and I would give the smallest nod, and then he'd announce the decision as if it had come down to him from the mountain. The truth is I handled every dime that came through that house from the day we got married. Walter couldn't balance a checkbook to save his life. He'd lose receipts in his coat pockets, forget to deposit checks for weeks, get a number in his head and refuse to let it go even when the math said otherwise. So I did it. Quietly. I paid the mortgage early when we could. I started a Christmas club account at the credit union before the kids could even talk. When the transmission shop offered Walter a chance to buy in as a partner in 1988, and he came home shaking his head saying we couldn't afford it, I didn't argue with him. I just went down to the bank the next morning, took out a loan against a little inheritance my aunt had left me that Walter never knew the size of, and put the money in his hands and said, "I found it. Don't ask me how." He bought in. That partnership is the reason we ever had anything at all. I let him be the man. I want you to understand that I chose that, all of it. It wasn't weakness. In my generation, in my town, a wife who ran the money out loud was a wife who shamed her husband, and a shamed husband was a miserable man, and a miserable man makes a miserable house. I decided early that I would rather have a peaceful home and a quiet power than a loud fight and a cold bed. Maybe that was wrong. The young women today would tell me it was wrong. But I'm not asking to be agreed with. I'm telling you what I did and why. So for 43 years I steered that family from the passenger seat and let everyone think Walter was driving. I knew where every dollar was. I knew where every dollar was. I knew we owned the house outright by 2009 because I made the last payment 4 years ahead of schedule. I knew about the brokerage account I'd opened in 2001 with my own savings and grown, by careful inches, into something that would have made my children's eyes fall out of their heads. I never spent on myself. I bought my clothes at the same outlet mall for 30 years. I drove a Buick until it had 200,000 miles on it, and all the while in an account that had my name and only my name on it, I was building a wall against the day I knew was coming, the day I would be old and alone and at the mercy of people who loved me. Because I'd watched it happen. I watched my own mother get old. I watched my brother, the charming one, the one everyone trusted, move into her house to help, and slowly help himself to everything she had, until she died in a Medicaid bed, with nothing, after a lifetime of working her hands to the bone. I was 35 when that happened, standing in a funeral home that smelled like carnations and floor wax, and I made myself a promise. I would never ever let myself be a woman who had to ask permission to live in her own life. I kept that promise for 33 years. I just never imagined I'd have to keep it against my own son. Walter got sick in the spring of 2024. It started with him being tired, then it was a cough, and by the time the doctors at the hospital in Dayton stopped using comforting words and started using careful ones, it was already everywhere. Lung cancer. 40 years of Marlboros come due all at once. He fought it for a year and a half. And I'll tell you, watching a quiet man die is its own particular grief, because he didn't rage and he didn't weep. He just got smaller and smaller, like a fire banking down to coals, until one Tuesday morning in the autumn of last year, he squeezed my hand and was gone before the home health aide even arrived. I held it together for the funeral. I always hold it together. That's another thing my generation does. We grieve in the laundry room with the door shut so nobody has to be uncomfortable. The casseroles came. The church ladies came. My son flew in from Charlotte, where he's some kind of regional manager, and my daughter drove up from Columbus with her husband, Caleb, and their daughter, my granddaughter, Junie, who is 9, and the only person in that whole house who hugged me like she meant it. And for about a week, it was the kind of grief a family is supposed to share. We told Walter stories. We laughed about how he'd never once in his life thrown anything away. We cried a little. I thought, all right, Eleanor. You have good children. You did something right. Then the will was read. Now, here is where I made a mistake, and I'll own it, because I won't tell you this story is a perfect victim. Walter's will, the official one, the one the lawyer read aloud, left everything to me. But everything in that will was just the house and the savings account we kept jointly, and his half of the shop, which he'd sold back to his partner years before for a sum we'd long since spent on his treatment. To the world, on paper, I was a widow with a paid-off house worth maybe $200,000 and about $30,000 in the bank, a comfortable but not wealthy old woman. The brokerage account, the real money, the thing I'd built, none of it was in that will, because none of it had ever been Walter's. It was mine. It had always been mine, and I had never told a living soul it existed. I should have told them I was fine. I should have, the very first night, sat my children down and said, "Your mother is taken care of. You don't need to worry about me." But I didn't. And I've thought a long time about why, and the honest answer is that some hard, watchful part of me, the part that buried my mother in a Medicaid bed, wanted to see what they would do. I wanted to know who my children really were before I handed them the truth. So I kept quiet, and I played the part everyone already believed, the helpless widow who'd let her husband handle the money, and now didn't know which end of a checkbook was up. It took them 9 days to show me. It was my son who started it, and it broke my heart that it was him, because he was always the one I worried about least. Nathaniel sat me down at my own kitchen table, the table where I'd fed him every breakfast of his childhood, and he put on the voice. You mothers will know the voice, the gentle one they use when they've already decided something and they're managing you toward it. Mum, he said, we've been talking, Bridget and Caleb and I, and we just want what's best for you. We don't think you should be in this big house all by yourself. I said I'd been in this house for 41 years. That's exactly it, he said. It's a lot to keep up. The roof, the yard, the stairs. What if you fell? Who'd even know? What he was describing, I want to be clear, was the natural and ordinary loneliness of outliving the person you built your life with. It wasn't a problem to be solved. It was just my life now, and I would have walked through it the way I'd walked through everything else. But he wasn't really talking about my safety. I knew that sitting there, the way you know weather coming. He kept getting to the edge of it and backing away, and finally my daughter, who had less patience and more honesty, said it plain. There's a place in Columbus, Bridget said, near us, assisted living. It's really nice, Mum, and if we sold the house it would more than cover it, and there'd be money left over to help all of us. Caleb's been wanting to start his own contracting business, and Nathaniel's got the kids' college coming, and I just thought, instead of all that equity sitting in a house nobody's using. And there it was, money left over to help all of us, my husband 11 days in the ground, and my children had already done the math on selling the house out from under me and splitting what was left. I sat very still. I found that stillness frightens people more than anger. I said in a voice I kept perfectly flat, and where would I live while you were dividing up my house? The assisted living place, Bridget said too quickly. It's lovely, Mum. You'd have your own little apartment. A little apartment, I said. With meals, Nathaniel added, like that settled it. I want to tell you something about that word, little. They kept using it. A little apartment, a little place, as if the goal were to make my whole existence smaller and smaller, until I fit into a space that didn't inconvenience anyone, until I was tidy and manageable and out of the way of their plans. I have sat in a lot of rooms in my life and made myself small to keep the peace. I made myself small for Walter, and I don't regret it, because Walter loved me. But I will be damned if I was going to make myself small, so my own children could be comfortable spending my money before I was finished living. But I didn't say any of that. Not yet. I'm a patient woman. Patience is a weapon, and I've kept mine sharp my whole life. I said I'd think about it. And then the lawyer's office. They didn't even wait for me to come around. Bridget made the appointment, just to understand the options. And the two of them drove me there, one on each side of me in the hallway like I was a prisoner, being walked to a hearing, and that nice young lawyer slid those papers across the desk, a listing agreement for the house, and a power of attorney that would have let my son make financial decisions on my behalf, and said my children would like me to sign. I looked at those papers a long time. The office was very quiet. The pen they'd handed me was heavy and silver and had somebody else's company name on it. And then I set it down. I said, before I sign anything, I'd like to make a phone call. Nathaniel started to say the lawyer could handle anything I needed, and I held up one hand, the way I used to when they were small, and I'd had enough, and to my surprise it still worked. They went quiet. I took out my phone, a phone they were always astonished I knew how to use, my children, as if I'd been frozen in 1985. And I called my own attorney. His name is Mr. Brennan. He's handled my private affairs for 22 years, ever since I opened the brokerage account, and not one member of my family had ever heard his name. I'd made sure of that. I said, Mr. Brennan, it's Eleanor. I'm sitting in another lawyer's office and my children are trying to sell my house. I think it's time. Could you come down here? You should have seen their faces. My daughter looked at me like I'd started speaking Russian. My son's mouth actually fell open, and the young lawyer behind the desk, he was no fool. He'd seen this kind of thing before. He sat back in his chair with the smallest smile and said, "Take your time, ma'am." Mr. Brennan arrived 40 minutes later in a grey suit, set his briefcase on the desk, and explained to my children, in the calm and merciless way that good lawyers have, exactly what their mother was worth. He laid it out, the house, owned free and clear, mine alone now. The 30,000 in the joint account, mine. And then the other account. The one I'd built quietly for 23 years, dollar by careful dollar, never touched, never spent, grown through 2 recessions and a pandemic into a figure that I watched land on my children's faces like a slap. It was a little over $1,400,000. Nobody said anything for a long moment. My daughter's hand was over her mouth. My son had gone grey, and I realized, looking at them, that the thing on their faces wasn't joy, and it wasn't even greed, not exactly. It was fear, because in the space of 1 sentence, the helpless old woman they'd come to manage had turned into someone who held all the power, all the cards, all the money, and who had just watched them try to take it. "Mom," Nathaniel finally said, and his voice cracked, "why didn't you tell us?" And that right there is the question that the whole rest of my life turned on. Why didn't you tell us? As if my hiding the money were the crime, and not what they'd done with the assumption that there wasn't any. I looked at my son, and I told him the truth, the way I'm telling you now. "Because," I said, "I needed to know what you'd do when you thought I had nothing, and now I know." I gathered my purse. I thanked the young lawyer for his time, and I walked out of that office on my own 2 feet, and Mr. Brennan drove me home, and the whole way there I shook so hard I had to hold my own hands to keep them still, because being right about your own children is the loneliest feeling there is. Now, if this were a story for television, that would be the end. The triumphant old woman who outsmarted everyone. But I've lived too long to believe in clean endings, and there's a second hidden truth in this story, the big one, the one I'd kept for almost 50 years, and it's the reason that money was never really about money at all. I have 3 children, not 2. In 1976, 3 years before I met Walter, I was 19 years old and I had a baby girl. I won't go into the whole of it. There was a young man who left, and there were parents of mine who couldn't bear the shame of it, in a town that small, and there was a home for unwed mothers, 2 counties over with white sheets and locked doors, and women in cardigans who told me over and over that the loving thing, the selfless thing, the Christian thing, was to give her up to a family who could give her a proper life. I held her for 11 minutes. I named her, in my heart, Hazel, after the colour of her eyes. And then a woman in a cardigan took her out of my arms, and I signed papers I wasn't allowed to read all the way through. And I went home and I never spoke of her again. Not to my parents, not to Walter, not to the children I raised, not to anyone for 48 years. That is the truth I built a wall of money around, because every dollar I saved, in some place underneath the place where I knew the reasons, was a dollar for the daughter I'd lost. I told myself the savings were for my old age, for safety, against ending up in a Medicaid bed like my mother. And that was true, but it was never the whole truth. The whole truth is that some part of me had been saving my entire adult life for a reunion I never believed would come. Building something solid to put in the hands of a child I'd given away with nothing. And then, 6 weeks after I walked out of that lawyer's office, she found me. It was an email. My granddaughter Junie had set up my account years ago, and I checked it maybe once a month, and there it was, between a coupon from the pharmacy and a reminder about a doctor's appointment. The subject line just said, I think you might be my mother." I sat at my kitchen table, that same table, and I read it 4 times before I let myself believe it. She'd found me through one of those DNA tests, the kind people do for fun, for ancestry, and it had matched her to a cousin, and the cousin had led her to me. Her name now was Hazel. They had named her Hazel too. Of all the things in this whole story, that's the one that still undoes me. The family that raised her, good people, a school teacher and a pharmacist in Indiana, had looked at her hazel eyes the same way I had, and given her the same name I'd whispered over her for 11 minutes, and never known. We talked on the phone that night for 3 hours. She's 49 years old. She has 2 grown sons of her own, which means I have grandsons I never knew, out there in the world, walking around. She's a nurse. She was scared to write to me, terrified, she said, that I'd be angry, that I wouldn't want to be found, that I'd reject her all over again. And I had to tell her through tears that wouldn't stop, that giving her up was the great wound of my life, the thing I'd organized my whole self around without ever admitting it, and that I had been, in the truest sense, waiting for her for 48 years. I drove to Indiana to meet her, by myself. I didn't tell Nathaniel or Bridget where I was going. We met in a diner off the interstate, the way you do, neutral ground, and she stood up from the booth when I came in and we just looked at each other. She has my mother's chin, she has my hands, and when she hugged me careful at first and then not careful at all, I felt something in my chest that had been clenched tight since 1976, finally let go. Here is what I want you to understand, and it's the thing that took me almost 70 years to learn. My son and my daughter believed I was a simple woman who'd let her husband handle the money, and then needed managing in her old age. They had no idea who I actually was, that I'd carried a child and given her away, that I'd quietly run a household's finances for 4 decades, that I'd built a fortune with my own discipline while letting everyone underestimate me, that I'd spent my whole life being the still water that everyone assumed wasn't deep. They didn't know me at all, and the terrible truth, the one I've had to sit with, is that I let them not know me. I made myself small for so long, so well, that my own children genuinely believed there was nothing more to me than the small thing I'd let them see. That was my failure, not just theirs. So I did some things differently after Indiana. I called my son and my daughter, and I asked them to come to the house. Not for a confrontation, but for the truth, finally, all of it. I sat them down at that kitchen table and I told them about Hazel. You should have seen Bridget's face when she understood she had a sister. There was hurt. Why didn't you ever tell us? And I let them have it, because they'd earned the right to be hurt, the same as I had. But there was something else too, something cracking open. My son, my regional manager son who tried to put me in a little apartment, put his face in his hands and wept and said, "I'm so sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry for the lawyer. I don't know who I thought you were." "You thought I was easy to take from," I said. "Most people think that about women my age. I let you think it. That's on both of us. We are not magically healed, my family and I. That's not how it works, no matter what the movies tell you. There's a coldness between me and my children that may take years to thaw, and may never thaw all the way, and I've made my peace with that being a possible cost of the truth. But I'll tell you what I did with the money, because everyone always wants to know about the money. I didn't cut my children off. I'm not a vengeful woman, whatever they thought when they saw that number. But I didn't hand it over either. I sat down with Mr. Brennan and I set up my affairs the way I wanted them while I'm still alive to decide. I put the house in an irrevocable trust so no one can ever sell it out from under me as long as I draw breath. And after I'm gone it goes to Junie, my granddaughter, the only one who hugged me like she meant it. I divided what remains 4 ways, equally, Nathaniel, Bridget and Hazel, and a fourth share that goes to a home for young women in crisis pregnancies, the kind of place that, 50 years ago, might have helped a scared 19-year-old keep her child if she'd wanted to, instead of taking her away. And I told my son and my daughter to their faces, "You will get your inheritance the day I die, not 1 minute sooner. And in the meantime, I am going to spend a good deal of it living, because I have spent my entire life saving and waiting and making do. And I am done making do. I bought a new car, a red one. Walter would have had a heart attack. I take Hazel and her boys to dinner once a month, and we are slowly, carefully, building the relationship that a woman in a cardigan stole from us in 1976. I am too old to get back the years I lost with her, and I won't pretend that doesn't grieve me every single day. But I have what's left, and what's left turned out to be a great deal more than the little apartment my children had picked out. People ask me, the few I've told this to, whether I'm angry. At my brother who robbed my mother. At my parents who sent me away. At my husband for never once letting me be the woman I really was. At my children for trying to put me out to pasture before the grass had even grown over their father's grave. And the truth, the last hidden truth, the one I've only just arrived at, is no, I'm not angry anymore. Anger is a young woman's fuel, and I burned through mine long ago. What I feel instead is something harder to name. It's the strange, clear-eyed peace of a woman who finally, at 68, after a lifetime of being underestimated and made small, and asked to give and give and give, stopped asking permission, who looked at the people she loved most in the world, saw them clearly, betrayal and all, and chose to keep loving them anyway, but on her own terms, with her own money, in her own house, in a red car, with her lost daughter beside her at last. I spent 48 years keeping my deepest truth locked away because I was ashamed, because I was afraid, because the world I grew up in taught me that a woman's worth was in how quietly she could carry her pain. And it nearly cost me everything, not the money. The money was always safe. It nearly cost me my children, who never knew me, and my daughter, who I might have died without ever holding again. So if you're out there listening to this and you're a woman my age, and you spent your whole life being the still water everyone assumes isn't deep, let me tell you the only thing I know for certain after all these years. The truth you've been hiding to keep the peace isn't keeping anything. It's just keeping you alone. Tell it while you still can. Tell it to the people who deserve to know who you really are. And if they try to make you small, if they slide a pen across a desk and ask you to sign yourself away, you set that pen down and you make your phone call and you let them find out, finally, exactly who they've been dealing with all along. I held my daughter for 11 minutes, and then I waited 48 years to hold her again. Don't you wait that long for anything, not one day longer than you have to. The pen they slid across that desk was the heaviest thing I'd ever held, and the strangest part is that setting it down didn't take strength at all. It took something I'd been building my whole life without a name for it. I think now it was the simple refusal to betray myself, even quietly, even to keep the peace. For 43 years I made myself small, so the people I loved could feel large. And what I learned far too late is that every time you shrink yourself to spare someone discomfort, you teach them that you are something that can be moved out of the way. Nathaniel and Bridget didn't wake up one morning cruel. I trained them, year by gentle year, to see their mother as furniture. The lawyer's office was just the day the lesson came due. Cause and effect runs through a family like water through limestone. You don't see it carving anything until one day the floor gives way. My silence about the money, my silence about Hazel, my silence about Helo, my silence about who I actually was, none of it kept anyone safe. It just kept me invisible, and invisible people get sold. I don't say that to make you bitter. I say it so you'll do the harder, braver thing while you still can. Here is what those years finally taught me, and I'd give a great deal to have known it at 30 instead of 68. There is a kind of goodness that is just fear wearing a nice dress. The goodness that goes along, that never makes a fuss, that calls its own erasure humility. Real decency is harder. It means being honest about what you're worth and refusing to let anyone, even your own son, treat you as less. That's not pride. That's the floor you stand on. And you need a clear mind to go with it. I watched, I waited, I let them show me who they were before I showed them who I was, and that patience saved everything I'd built. Sentiment would have signed those papers. Clear eyes set the pen down. But the thing I want you to carry most is the steadiness underneath. The grit to keep your own counsel for 23 years. The nerve to make one phone call in a room full of people, certain you were helpless. The endurance to wait 48 years for a daughter and then drive to Indiana alone to claim her. That quiet, stubborn backbone is the most valuable thing a woman ever owns, and no one can hand it to you. You build it the same way I built that account, one small, unglamorous choice at a time. I held Hazel for 11 minutes, then waited a lifetime to hold her again. Don't wait. Be kind, but never invisible. Be soft, but never easy to take from. And the day someone slides a pen across the desk and asks you to disappear, set it down, lift your head, and let them learn, at last, exactly who they've been dealing with.